Mhm. Okay, great. So, thank you for participating in the County of Orange Housing Element Update webinar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. My name is Cindy Salazar, Planning Manager with OC Public Works Development Services Planning. County staff in attendance include Stephanie Clark, Deputy County Counsel, Yuritsi Randall, Associate Planner in Planning. We also have Diana Gonzalez with MIG, Jamie Powers with Veronica Tam and Associates, and Veronica Tam with Veronica Tam and Associates. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Diana for the presentation.
Thank you, Cindy. Tonight we'll be presenting the county's revised housing element with the focus on the key changes that have been made to the document since the last draft in July 2023. We'll also quickly give some background on the housing element process and what the next steps will be. At the end of the presentation, there'll be time for any comments or questions. Next. We know many of you are already familiar with the housing element, but we have some background information to ensure everyone has a similar level of understanding. The housing element is a document that is a key part of the unincorporated county's long-term plan that outlines how they'll meet the housing needs of everyone in the community. An update every 8 years is required by law to ensure that the element reflects current community needs and addresses changing county and state goals. The element is also reviewed by a state agency to make sure it meets the legal requirements. And for the housing element, there are many legal requirements, which we'll cover in a bit. Getting approval, which we call certification, helps the county avoid legal consequences and makes the rest of the general plan valid. Next. Again, the housing element has to comply with many regulations. A key part of the element is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or the RHNA, which is the number of units that the state and regional government has estimated is needed in the unincorporated county. The RHNA identified for the unincorporated county for this planning period is 10,406 units. Those are distributed among 4 income categories based on income and affordability. Now, the county doesn't have to build these units, but it does have to show the state how it can accommodate that level of growth. A new addition to the housing element this cycle is an in-depth fair housing analysis referred to as affirmatively furthering fair housing, or AFFH. And that requires the county to show how it will actively promote fair housing with the aim to create more equitable and inclusive community. Next. The housing element process started with the community outreach program to ensure that the plan reflects the needs and priorities of the community. The housing element has been submitted to the state 3 times, and the state has provided feedback that has allowed the county to make changes to better align with the requirements and intent of the law. The state agency doing this review is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, which we call HCD. And during this back and forth process, the community was also given the chance to comment on the drafts. The draft that's available now reflects all the changes that have occurred during this process, and this version will be resubmitted to the state in a few weeks for a new review. Next. This latest version reflects a variety of changes, and while it is really updated, we will briefly summarize some key changes. In September 2023, HCD summarized some of the findings that needed to be addressed to better reflect the requirements of the law. Because this was not the first submittal of the housing element, the comments focused only on a few parts of the element. On the fair housing analysis, which we call AFFH, the inventory of sites to show that the county can meet its assigned RHNA, and on the programs the county is proposing to address identified housing need. Next. The fair housing analysis was reviewed and revised, and I will hand it over to my colleague Veronica to quickly review these changes.
Next. Thank you, Diana. Next. As Diana mentioned, the new requirements of the housing element law is the requirement to affirmatively furthering fair housing. essentially, the state looks at fair housing in 5 different themes. Fair housing outreach and education is the jurisdiction, furthering the concept and resident understanding of fair housing. Are you also providing new housing opportunities in higher resource areas? Higher resource areas, usually those are those areas that have access to recreation opportunities, employment, and other amenities like grocery stores and banks and community facilities. Is the jurisdiction also providing a variety of housing types and locational choices, housing mobility, allowing the residents to choose the housing of their desire or that meets their needs within the jurisdiction? Place-based strategies for neighborhood improvements is the jurisdiction really paying attention to all the complementary neighborhood improvements in order to make areas, residential areas or mixed-use areas, suitable living environments. And last but not least, is the jurisdiction doing anything to combat displacement and also provide tenant protection as the housing market conditions continue to move towards higher prices? Next slide. So when we did the housing element, we have to provide analysis of the existing conditions, fair housing conditions within the jurisdiction, within the county and incorporated areas, and then also looked at how is the housing element going to be able to make impacts, a positive impacts towards furthering fair housing. When the original draft housing element was submitted to the state, we did receive findings about the analysis and also the how the housing element can further fair housing, particularly in the areas of integration and segregation, whether there are areas that have really higher disproportionate housing needs and whether those areas are concentrated in particular locations and whether certain race and ethnicity or fair housing protected classes are concentrated in areas that have higher housing needs. We also need to look at the fair housing picture from local perspective, from local knowledge, not just based on data, but really based on also historical patterns and also observations on the ground. The other thing that the state wanted us to emphasize is to look at where the sites are going to be for future housing and how by providing opportunities for new development, how is it going to further fair housing choice like mobility and having housing areas, housing in higher resource areas. And last but not least, how does the housing actions that the county is going to undertake in the next few years really address the issues identified in the analysis and also complement all the housing programs and policies in the housing element. So with that in mind, we make certain revisions to the housing element. Next slide. The key changes that we have made is certainly provided more historical context to the land use pattern within the unincorporated areas. We provided a lot more details in the integration and segregation patterns, looking at more about race and ethnicity, familial status, whether somebody has children or not, income, and also disability status. We also expanded a lot more discussions on disproportionate housing needs. And we also certainly looked at the distribution of the sites for the regional housing needs allocation, future growth by geographic locations. We divided the county into planning areas that are recognizable by residents, North County, Central County, and South County, and also more detailed into the census designated places. This is done for looking at not only the distribution of the sites, but looking at a lot of the discussions that we talked about earlier the detailed data on land use patterns and segregation patterns based on the geographic references that we identify here. And also we expanded meaningful actions to address the AFFH findings identified by the state and identified by the analysis. We specifically provided more specific timelines and outcomes and geographic targeting. So those are key changes to the AFFH. They are, a lot of it is technical in nature, but we certainly have expanded a lot of actions towards fair housing. With that, I think I would pass it back to Diana.
Thank you, Veronica. Next. As we mentioned earlier, the county has to show that it can meet the housing need or the RHNA that's been assigned. And for the site inventory findings, this is a quick recap. Just in general, the HCD comments ask for specific adjustments to the housing inventory and the methodology to show that the proposed inventory is realistic and achievable. And I'm going to go through the 4 topics of changes to the site inventory. The first is realistic capacity, because we have to estimate how many units can be built on identified sites. We added information to show that the estimates we used are realistic, and we did this by showing local trends and examples of projects that have been built in the unincorporated county and in neighboring jurisdictions. Next. We also had to strengthen our argument that the redevelopment of sites that already has buildings on them is realistic. And we did this using the same local building trends and showing that the actions the county has completed also will encourage redevelopment of land to create housing. Next. We also added information to show that our inventory complied with state law, which limits how we can use sites that are large or small, large being anything over 10 acres in size and small being anything that is half an acre or less than half an acre in size. Next. And finally, we revised how we estimated the number of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, that can be built in the next few years. This is because we're able to use the number of ADUs that might realistically be built in the next few years to offset some of the RHNA units. Next. Now, overall, the approach to the site inventory hasn't changed from the last version of the housing element, but the inventory was refined to make sure that the sites that were chosen show that the county has capacity for new housing and that estimate is realistic and it meets the requirements of the law. As you can see, close to half of the RHNA can be met on sites that already allow housing on them and required no zoning changes, and the other half on sites that are in the updated housing opportunity overlay, which provide opportunities and incentives for future affordable housing projects. A small portion of the RHNA units are met with ADU estimates or with development that's already been or is in the process of being built. Now, if you can see in the chart, the numbers add up to more than 100%. Because we have extra sites just in case any of the sites that we chose redevelop with something other than housing or don't redevelop. Next. And now the housing programs in the housing element are specific actions or initiatives that the county plans to take to meet its housing goals. The programs can include things like offering financial help for affordable housing, updating zoning laws to allow more homes to be built or to address changes in state law, or providing assistance for low-income renters or first-time home buyers. Now, the purpose of these programs is to make sure the community has enough housing options for everyone. In response to HCD's last review, many of the programs were updated to show when they will be implemented and what the specific outcomes are that the county hopes to achieve. This way, the programs show a real effort to address the issues. Next. We also edited some of the programs so that the intent and the details complied with state law. For example, we added wording to the RHNA Sites program, which is program number 1, to show that the county will make sure that if development on sites does not occur as planned, that the county will show that there are still other opportunities for development or that they will be replaced. And as we mentioned earlier, Veronica explained edits were made to the fair housing programs to show that the AFFH findings were addressed and that there are specific timelines, outcomes, and that these programs are focused in specific areas or neighborhoods. Next. So where do we go next? After tonight, we'll take any feedback received and if needed, revise a document and get it ready to send to the state for a 60-day review. During that time, we will work with HCD to address any new findings or make new edits with the hopes that they'll find the housing element in compliance with the law at the end of the review period. Once they give us the okay, we can adopt the housing element and continue implementing the actions that are included in the element. Next. If you'd like more information on the housing element update, the county has a dedicated website. Here you can access information from previous meetings. You can also access the latest draft element. And you could also get in contact with the county through this email. If you know anyone that needs translation help, they can reach out to the county in their language, and staff will make sure someone gets in contact with them. That concludes the presentation portion of the webinar, and I'll hand it over to staff, and we could either take any comments or questions, or if you're listening to this recording, you could reach out to city staff or through the website to ask questions or submit comments.
Great. Thank you, Diana. So as mentioned, this concludes the webinar. So for any information and for updates, please visit the website. As you can see here, this PowerPoint will be uploaded as well on the Housing Element webpage. And for any follow-up questions, please email the email address listed on the screen. So thank you for joining. I'll stop this recording now.